Hey, Fanboy Nation.
This is your pal Daffy Duck, and you're watching.
You're watching Fanboy.
Fanboy, fanboy, etc.
Fanboy Nation.
I assume Tom.
This morning, I have the pleasure of speaking with documentarian Michael Messner about his award-winning film, First Year Checking, about youth hockey and all the traumatic injuries that go along with it. I've suffered a few injuries myself from all my years of wrestling and judo, so I have a feeling of knowing what these kids are going through. Mike, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Take us through the catalyst of wanting to tell this story. I mean, this primarily takes place in Minnesota, so Canada Junior. Actually, depending on... I'm sorry.
We're in Pittsburgh. We are in Pittsburgh.
You're in Pittsburgh. I'm sorry.
That's
See,
okay.
that's my own concussions. Yeah.
Well, we actually had people from the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota who participate in the film, and we were all over the place too. So, yeah, mainly in Pittsburgh though.
Yeah. What was the catalyst to want to make this film for people that haven't watched it yet?
Well, for me, any good documentary takes you someplace where you've never been before. And myself, I've been in hockey for 40 years, and I was coaching my daughter's team, and she was playing with all boys. And between her 12th and 13th year, she was making a decision whether to stay with boys or not. And she said, I'm going to stay with boys. And I thought nothing of it, but I didn't realize that checking is when, at that 13th year is when it's introduced. So I watched my daughter go into this violent world of Czech hockey. And I thought to myself, wow, this is a really, really scary place. And she was a strong skater and a little bit bigger than some of the kids. And she fared okay in it, but some kids quit. Some kids had concussions. Some kid broke their arms. So my son, 2 years later, was going to go into that first year of checking too. And I said, you know, I'm going to take a camera for the first couple of days of the tryouts and see what happens and see if it can make an interesting film. And sure enough, the first day of tryouts, a kid got a concussion. And my son really shared intimately that he was, you know, a little afraid in his 12th year. He was a little scared. He was, you know, 4'5" or something like that, going up against some kids who were 6 feet. It's not like football where they have the weight limits or the height limits or anything. So you have to go up against these kids who are just getting their testosterone ahead of you and face this world where you're going to get basically hammered, or it turns from a game you love that you've skated for 6 years and you're always happy to be on the ice to a game where, oh man, this is really scary, violent stuff. So that was the impetus. And when we first started filming it, I said, okay, we've got something here. So then we continued for about a year and a half.
Right, because, you know, in combat sports, wrestling, judo, boxing, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, you know, et cetera, we have weight classes. So, you know, we're not going to have a 115-pound guy go up against a 180-pound guy. It just didn't make sense. But with hockey, you know, you're on skates, you're padded. Some kids hit puberty at 10. Some don't hit it till they're 15 or 16 and, you know, are late bloomers. With your son being 4'6", and you named him Grayson, so I'm just assuming you're a huge Batman fan at this point. I have to tease you a little bit, you know, because we have to make light of how rough this is, and especially for a parent to watch their child go through this. What is it like for you to see that versus, you know, you said you've been in this since he started at his age, you know, for you to go back and reflect on it, on your own experience as a hockey player?
Yeah, well, now that we've diverted just slightly with Grayson, I'm going to divert even further for you. The most famous goaltender I used to play with in Pittsburgh, we would play late night hockey. He was a great goalie. He was one of the first, well, not one of the first, but he would go into the butterfly stance. There's goalies who've made it the NHL, but this player was the nicest guy. He drew me a huge portrait when I quit playing hockey of myself. And that player's name is Dave Filoni. He is the nicest person in the world. And then I go and turn on the TV a couple of months ago and I'm watching The Mandalorian, and he's the man in charge of that whole world. And I had heard and I had seen some of that stuff. So as we divert, and this is the right place to do it on your channel here, but he was the greatest guy. He just loved it. He had a passion for everything. But I have this great, humongous portrait of myself that he drew, and it looks just like these Star Wars characters. So maybe I'll take a picture of that and send it to you guys, and we can try to auction it off or something. But just know, if you're a fan of Dave Filoni, he was a great guy and always level-headed, and just, most goalies are crazy, but he was the nicest guy in the world. And I've lost contact with him, and I think he's probably unfriended me on Facebook because I'm a little weird on there. So who knows?
Well, you do have a one-of-a-kind original, so I don't know if you really want to part with that just yet.
Well, it's in my attic, and my kids don't care. So, maybe I will bring it out at some point. It's kind of weird that I asked to get a portrait of my hockey, because I was never that great, and I didn't make it to this humongous level. But he was kind enough to, for $200, made this monstrous painting that I'll send a picture of it for you guys.
I'm looking forward to it. It sounds like you still are level-headed and you have a good head on your shoulders. But, again, with your children and your daughter playing in an all-boys league at the time, and then your son coming up and realizing that he wasn't, again, a 12-year-old that was 6 feet tall in comparison to him to being 4'6", because that kid hit puberty a year before everybody else. What does that do to you, not as a parent, pulling back and wanting to examine this, and then dealing with the Mayo Clinic and bringing them in from Minnesota to see how this goes about?
Yeah, well, and then there was the third factor, right? Because I was the cameraman for the film as well. So there were instances, and you can see in the film, where my son does get injured. My son does get hit, and I'm actually on the ice during practices, and the dad in me wants to go pick him up, right, and give him a hug. The filmmaker in me wants to, get a close up, make sure that I don't miss the shot. And then the coach in me wants to say, maybe this is a really good time that I don't do anything, and this kid just toughens up on his own. And the kids can go both ways, right? So some of Cecilia's teammates quit after the year. Grayson found a way to dig down deep, and it's so fascinating to watch these kids. And you were in contact sports yourself, and I think all contact sports, there's such a benefit to them that some people think I want to eliminate checking or put these strict rules on it. All I want to do is I want to make it a little safer. But I sincerely think that contact sports make you stronger. They make you better. And my daughter and two other girls who went through it, these two badass chicks, Dylan Green and Neely Nicholson, my daughter's name is Cecilia, they all excel in their other sports because they have that grit, they have that toughness, and they're all going to go on and play pretty high level. Now, my daughter quit ice hockey, but she's transferred that over to lacrosse and to field hockey, and she's a badass out there as well. So I think there's such a great benefit to it. I don't want to eliminate. I think we need to shine a light on it a little bit more than we have, and protect these kids a little more than we do.
I get it. Your daughter is looking at you like, Dad, we already live in the snow. Do I really need to be on the ice? Let me just go play in the field a little bit. But,
yeah.
But with everything that's going on, and it's prepared them for other sports and other activities in life. If we go back to the early days of hockey, there was no cups, there was no mouth guards, there were no helmets. I think there was one final player who played for the Sharks in like the early 90s, who was the last guy to get a face mask because he started playing before the rule was incorporated. So he got grandfathered in without having to wear a face mask. So, we've progressed over the years. People think, we haven't progressed in these combat sports, yet we have. I mean, if we look at mixed martial arts and the UFC primarily, from UFC 1 to UFC 5, so many new rules were incorporated so that when we got to UFC, 10 and 15 and beyond, we've had different sets that led to modern mixed martial arts. So why is there that crowd that sits there and go, oh, the sport has been ruined, when we've seen over the last 100 years of hockey how it's progressed to be safer, to the point that, we have padding now and we have everything else that goes along with it.
Well, and you make a great point. And the Penn State coach, Guy Godowski, who was in the film, he made this point after the fact, and it wasn't included in the film, but the equipment actually makes these players think they're tougher than they are, and they are almost indestructible with their shoulder pads, with their shin pads. I mean, I was a person who I didn't lift over the summers. I just got bigger shoulder pads every year. But now the way that these kids are protected, when they go into a collision, right, they are fully protected and it feels pretty good. But what's not protected, right? As we all know, the concussions, your head's not protected. When you slam into somebody and your brain doesn't stop moving, it's going right up against the skull. And that's when serious damage occurs. And especially at this age, the Mayo Clinic was like, this is a terrible age to introduce checking, because this is when that brain is forming. And we don't have enough information that how many of these concussions at these ages, how much effect does that have in 10 years or in 15 years? I know it's affected me. I have a bad sense of direction, I think, just because of how many times I got hit in the head. But it's like, all kidding aside, it's a serious thing that we gotta look at a little bit closer, because as you say, hockey's progressed, it's gotten so much faster. So these collisions are happening at a rate of speed that we're not used to. The kids are so highly skilled. They start skating at such a young age now that they're so fast. The collisions can be quite scary, and they can be really harmful, obviously, to the kids' brains.
You know, CTE and traumatic brain injury, they're not recent phenomenon, but they've had the light shined on them in the last few years. Primarily with the NFL and what happened over there. And now it's coming around and how dangerous this really is, especially for kids, and getting punched in the face and hit in the head and slammed against the ice, or against the glass in hockey or whatever else. That has the padding also become kind of a hindrance in that regard? Because before, you didn't want, like, if we look at rugby versus American football, we see that rugby players, although they do get injured and a lot of stuff happens to them, it seems like they have less injury than football players, because they have far less padding, that they're a little more cautious with it, or at least a little more responsible in their tackles and takedowns.
And with those helmets, you lose a little bit of the human aspect, right? When you see a person's face and they don't have that helmet protecting them, they seem a little more human. And maybe, I mean, you cannot take helmets off, you can't do that, but there's got to be a way that these kids have a little more respect for each other, because as soon as some of them get the testosterone and they really feel like knocking kids out, they can. And the other problem with the sport is they want to grow the sport. If a kid starts at 12 and 13 years old, he just has no chance, because you have to be an expert skater now by the time you're 12 and 13, because now we're going to add the checking aspect. And if you can't skate, and some of these other kids who might have a testosterone, had a bad day, and wants to take it out on somebody, they can really injure these players. It's so hard to skate. So once you've mastered that, then you can go into the check hockey. But if you're trying to expand a sport and grow a sport, your cutoff is 12 years old. Nobody can start playing ice hockey at 12 and 13 years old if they're in these checking leagues. In Pittsburgh, we didn't have any non-checking leagues, and they're very hard to find. And you have macho dads and moms who say, hey, you know what, if you're going to play hockey, you're going to really play hockey. Another interesting point is, in Canada, in Ontario, they banned checking in certain levels. So there's a high level, which is AAA, then there's AA, single A. So in the AA and AAA levels, they've banned checking completely. Whereas we in the United States, we're going gung-ho at it. And that's some of the more dangerous levels. And as hockey evolves in California, in Texas, and all these other places, it's hard to get referees. It's hard to get people who understand exactly what goes into it. So you're turning all these people loose who don't have that much experience and don't have that much knowledge, and letting these kids go kind of nuts on each other. And I don't want to say that it's nuts every game and kids don't respect each other, because overall it's a very small percentage. But the ones who do, they can really cause harm. And more importantly, they can ruin the sport forever for a kid. The kid can never want to go play contact sports, never faces fears and hurdles because they're just not ready. So there's some kind of middle ground that we've got to find, maybe adding referees, maybe doing what the NHL does and bring on some, some eyes in the sky who look and say that kid shouldn't play. But we don't have any of that. And it all falls on the coach. And we're supposed to see everything that's going on. And also if a kid gets hit in the head, sit him down. Well, we don't see everything. There's no way we're going to see that. So there's got to be a little bit more of a light shined on it. And hopefully that's what this film, First Year Checking, is doing.
Well, you're doing something right. I mean, you're showing all these kids, especially with their injuries, broken arms, broken ankles, all sorts of things, and skating is not easy on your ankles. Like, I don't want to get out on skates just to go to the ice rink because I know how bad my knees and ankles are. I could only imagine being a hockey player on top of all that.
It is the hardest sport, and it is so beautiful. And one of the things that was said in the film is that hockey doesn't really know how beautiful it is. They really don't understand. They have so little faith in the sport itself that they have to add the fighting, they have to add the collisions. Whereas you don't. I mean, what others? Basketball doesn't have that, right? Now football has it, but they're drastically cleaning it up. Hockey needs to kind of follow suit and drastically clean up what they're doing. Football's doing a good job, I think. You don't see those guys, leading with their head. They're doing a great job at the youth levels, really coaching coaches on that, and they're protecting quarterbacks, and I think they're doing a good job. I think the NHL is always a little bit behind, and everyone in hockey is always a little bit behind, which is natural, I guess, because they're the third sport.
Is it interesting in that regard? I mean, you mentioned third sport. I was going to call it fourth after baseball.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No. It's only because, baseball is America's national pastime because it takes forever to play. But I couldn't resist, and everyone's made that joke forever. But, it's one of the big four, but it still doesn't have the recognition that the other ones have. Like basketball, I call it a cheap sport because you need a basket and you need a ball. So, it's not going to cost you more than $30 to start playing basketball. Hockey is not a poor man's game. I mean, just the initial cost to buy in, and especially, kids that are 12 years old that are about to hit their growth spurt, you have to, it's a $1,200 bare minimum investment just in equipment. Yeah. So to put that time in and that effort in, and then of course the parents sit there and go, I spent, let's say $2,500 on this, on the higher end, you're going to finish the season. What does that do on top of it because of how expensive it is?
That's another thing I never thought of, because there is that pressure from the parents. They're always in the stands. They're always, micromanaging everything all of these young players do. And so that is an added pressure. And I do agree with you. I think one aspect that really helped my family was Sidney Crosby, the great player for the Penguins. He started something where he gives away equipment to whoever wants to play hockey every year. And that's how my daughter and my son started. We got this bag from Dick's Sporting Goods that had all this free equipment. And because my daughter and my son, they weren't necessarily ever going to play hockey, but it just so happened we read the flyer on this one day, and I was gung-ho on my son playing. And my wife, of course, Lauren, was like, well, what about Cecilia? Let's get her in there. I said, okay, that sounds great. So the both of them got in because Sidney Crosby made these donations, and he does it every year. And he's such an advocate. And because you don't want to just drop $1,200 on equipment, and he's made it such an easy access game for your first year. I'll tell you, the fees for our last year were about $4,000 for the year, and that's before you start traveling. So we go to Buffalo, you go to Philadelphia, and you leave on a Thursday, and you got Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night hotels, and there's another $5,000 on top of the year. So you're spending $10,000 if you're trying to move up in the hockey world. And it's really not unusual to spend more than that. So yeah, you're right. The cost of entry is really detrimental, and it adds another layer of pressure on these kids mentally. And that was the one thing I was really proud of. These kids really told me exactly what they were feeling, how hard it was when they were going through concussions, what they were thinking, how they were feeling. And I think that's something different than a lot of documentaries where you see there's a lot of talking heads. We were with these kids in the practice while they were feeling whatever they were feeling, they were telling us. And I can't, I can't thank them enough for doing that all year, because it's hard. It's hard to say this hurts, or I'm scared, or I don't want to do that, or I hate that kid. And these kids really poured out their hearts, and it makes the film a little different than most you're seeing now.
Right. It's not just a bunch of adults saying, oh, these kids, and then we never hear from the kids. I mean, you focused primarily on the children themselves, and that's the purpose of it. I mean, you're calling it first year checking, and if you didn't focus on the kids themselves, it wouldn't have made any sense, because it's their first year being able to check. With how everything's going on top of it, how do we, as adults, for those of you that are parents, for those that are coaches, or at least helping their nieces and nephews play a sport, how do adults open up to allow the children to open up and tell them, look, I felt dizzy the last 3 games. My knee is really hurting. Something's wrong in my back, my hand's tingling, because a lot of people don't like to vocalize, especially in contact sports and combat sports, don't want to appear weak, that they don't necessarily bring these things up.
It is, the concussion part is so hard for us to understand. And you think as a parent, you can tell when your kid is making something up and your kid is just has a fear and he's trying to get through it. That's why, to your point, I think we need a third party to say, this kid is out. Do not put him back in. Because when I'm looking at my son and I'm looking at how much I'm paying for this weekend, and he gets hurt on that first shift of this weekend, and I'm paying $700 for the weekend, I do not want him to not play the rest of the weekend. And you are thinking selfishly. You're thinking about that money. As you bring that up, that's just a beautiful point. And it's one that I didn't really focus on or think about, but you think about when think about that, the first shift, you get hit in the head of the whole weekend. Are you going to tell your kid to try to get back? Are you going to try to get him back the next game if he sat out that game? What are you going to do? Because there's no doctors traveling with these teams. I mean, that reminds me of the first fight I ever got into. My dad drove us up to Ajax in Ontario. And the first game of this 5-game weekend, this guy jumped me, and I was not a fighter, but I had to sort of hang on for dear life, and they kicked me out for the whole tournament. And my dad was like, well, you could have waited till Sunday. This was like the Thursday. So that cost them a lot of money back then. And back, it's a weird thing. That cost factor that you're talking about is a neat factor that we maybe have part 2.
Well, let's hope, because this is a fantastic documentary, and we need to figure out what's going on. You as a father now, and you're talking to your kids about this, what did you learn about yourself making a documentary about this? Because, you mentioned your dad was like, well, you could have at least waited till Sunday. I mean, he's making a joke of it, even though it was a bit of a financial strain on him. I don't know, his finances, so I can't say specifically, but you sit there with the kids and go, wow, I realize that I'm breaking the pattern of what I went through when I was 12 to what my son and daughter went through at they were 12. And now moving forward, I see differently because XYZ.
I do, but you also have that feeling of checking made me a tougher person. Checking got me, the closeness and the respect of my teammates and my opponents. So there is maybe the fact that you played, or the fact that you went through it, it could be a harm as well, because you think, oh, well, I got a hit harder than that when I was his age. He can fight through that. It was good for me because the next time I wasn't as scared, where maybe he got hit the wrong way this time, and it's bad for every part of his body. And yeah, so that's a great question too. But yeah, for me, I was probably a little tougher on him. I can remember him getting his head sat on and getting banged, and I would just scream, get up. So especially when they were younger in the squirt level, I could clearly remember me screaming, get up, instead of me letting him stay down and maybe feel sorry for himself. So maybe us older players are tougher than we should be on this current group, and we should really listen more than we do, because I'm not a great listener as far as him, and getting a little bit tougher.
You know, what I've noticed with American sports in comparison to international players, you know, the Russians, the Iranians would have, you know, you go 60%, you know, so that way you can train 5 days a week, 6 days a week. Americans, for some reason, we have this mentality of we have to go 100% all out every single day, and there's nothing left in the tank. Is there something that we can learn from the international communities where maybe we should pull back to 50, 60% during practice and realize that, you know, save some of that for game day so we're not playing hurt or worse, injured?
That's a strong point. And to that point, adding on to that is that even though there isn't a lot of supervision during the games, there usually is an EMT, and you have at least 2 coaches, and you have all the parents watching the game. So if a kid does get hit in the head, they see it. During practice, a lot of the times it's just me out there, and I'll have a drill going in front of me and a drill going behind me at times. So you might be right on with that 60% in practice, kind of like they do in the NFL now, where we don't hit. You know, we don't hit in our practices. We only going to hit in the games. Maybe during the preseason we'll hit a little bit, but during the week we don't do that. And some of these teams are practicing 4 and 5 times a week, and that's a lot of head hits. That's a lot of bodily harm that can happen day in and day out that somebody might not see. And if a player comes up and says, "Oh, hey, Johnny just got hit in the corner," and you didn't see it, you might not know how severe it could be. And Johnny's going to come to you, like most of these hockey players, and say, "Oh, I'm good. I'm good." And what do you do? You know, what do you do? So yeah, that's a great point about practice. Maybe the governing body that we go under is called USA Hockey. Maybe they should really govern that a little bit more than they do. They govern the games, but during the practices, there's nobody from USA Hockey ever watching. And maybe they should say, okay, no contact such and such a day a week. If you practice 3 times, no contact 2 days. Something like that. That's a really good thought. And I tried to really dial back the contact in my practices, just not even thinking about this point, but that's a really good argument.
You know, I joke quite a bit that I say, you know, if I had known how many injuries I would have received from combat sports, I would have stuck with swimming. With what it is, and like, you know, you still want to instill mental toughness and physical toughness, but without being a danger to yourself and to your opponents. You know, and you see what these kids are going through. At some point, you know, especially when testosterone's kicking in and they're hitting puberty, there is that peacocking. There is that, you know, moment of showing off either for your peers or for the girls in the stands. I think it was Dr. Seuss that said, and I'm paraphrasing, that, you know, men will do everything stupid at least once, but definitely twice if a girl's involved. You know, what about that aspect of it? Like, how do we rein that in and go, look, I get it, you want to show off for your friends, but, you know, you don't want to sit out the rest of the season with a dislocated kneecap.
You know, you really do see that. You really see the 1 or 2 kids who are trying to establish their dominance. You know, it's in their genes. They're trying to say, I am the baddest person on this ice. And some of the kids are saying, yes, you are. You sure are, and staying away. But others who might have a little more fight in them, but not as much brawn, sometimes they get hurt. So yeah, there are some great examples of that. And if there's any, you know, talking between 2 teams, that's when you see really some collisions. And we have documented that in the film. And you can see there's one segment where you can see that in particular, where a player who's bigger, and he might not be doing it maliciously, but he knows how to hit. He knows how to take a player out. And once you get checked, you're a different player. And now that player does have dominance over you in the game, so that when we're going for that 50-50 puck, he's going to get it every time because the other kid's going to back off. And that's a huge advantage in hockey. And that was the whole theory behind why fighters are involved in the NHL, right? Because, okay, I'm going to stay away from this star player now and not check him because this fighter is going to kill me if that happens. Now, I think that should go the way of the dinosaur, but the NHL still, it's fading away, but it's still there. It's still there for some reason. I think they need to appreciate the game more. I think they need to, we all need to appreciate the game more and respect each other more, respect each other as players a lot more. But that's hard when you have that testosterone, you're 13 years old.
You know, I made mention of, you know, international communities and pulling back to 60%. Let's say there is a sequel to first year checking. We'll call it second year checking. And, you know, and we'll spell Czech like Czech Republic, just, you know, so we can go international and have fun with it. What would we be looking for to learn from the international community, especially Eastern Europe, where hockey, you know, I mean, we go back to the 1980 Winter Olympics, and, you know, I mean, beating the Russians were essentially a professional team, quote, at an amateur level. And now, you know, we see how the Eastern Europeans play hockey, the Canadians play hockey, the French, the Germans, etc., in comparison to the United States.
Well, if this film is a very emotional film, and I think that's, you know, I think if we do a part two, it would be more crunching the numbers. It would be more seeing, okay, this Minnesota league abandoned USA Hockey, and they start checking right when you start playing hockey. Let's study them a little bit more. There's actually a league in Quebec where you're not allowed to check in the neutral zones, which is in between the blue lines, which is where you pick up your most speed. So I think it would be more analytical if we did it too. I think there is plenty. It might be a 30-minute or something like that, but I think there is so much that we can study now. That Minnesota league formed a couple of years ago. So now those kids are starting to get into their real, quote unquote, ages of checking. So let's see how they're faring. Are they better at it? Because what I've discovered, when you turn that switch on to checking, it's a different game, because when you're stick handling the puck up until you're going to be checked, your head is down, you're looking at that puck. Now, when you do that, when somebody's coming to check you, you're in big trouble, right? Because you should be sticking with your head up. You should be able to see everything. Whereas if you started checking when you were really young, you would learn that right away. And so I think it would be a more analytical second film, but I think there's so much fodder, and I think we could get into the USA Hockey dissection a little bit more.
And what about a possibility of best of 5 series between the league in Quebec that doesn't allow it in the neutral zone versus the league in Minnesota that said, all right, go for it?
Yeah, that would be very, very interesting. I think the Minnesota team would win that one, but I don't know.
Yeah. Mike, it's been a great pleasure talking to you. I know first year checking is available on demand right now in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. Any great expansion, you know, subtitling it in multiple languages for people that want to see internationally that are interested in hockey? And what would you recommend for parents, you know, not in the Northeast or the Northern Midwest, where the sport is primarily played because of the climate, to say here, California, Arizona, New Mexico, you know, the Southwest, or even Southern states that want to pick up the sport because they've been exposed to it later than, you know, you guys playing since you were born?
Well, you know, I think you just have to become a really proficient skater to do anything in the ice hockey world. My partner, Barry Reese, who founded this awesome films with me, his son played in the NHL, was a great player. But when he was this age, he couldn't skate backwards. So he had played a year of hockey, but his dad noticed that he couldn't skate backwards. He took him out of hockey completely and made him take skating lessons for that year. And he was one of the greatest skaters ever out of Pittsburgh, played for the Rangers, Penguins, and all these teams. So once you get that skating down, then maybe start falling in love with the sport, because as soon as you get that stick and puck, you fall in love with the sport, and all you want to do is score goals, and you don't concentrate on the skating as much as you should. So yeah, get that skating down, and it's okay to be a helicopter parent and make sure you're the one protecting your child, because I was a coach for my team and I didn't protect them as well as a mom or dad would have.
All right, Mike, I'm going to leave you with this, and I'm going to make it a little challenging for you. All right, since you're in Pittsburgh, I already expect you to say the Penguins are going to win the Stanley Cup next year. Who's going to win the Western Conference?
Ooh, the Western Conference. That is a very interesting. I actually was in a commercial with Marc-Andre Fleury, and now he's in Chicago. They don't have a chance. But I think his old team, the Golden Knights, I think they might they'll win it again, and I think they finally might break through and win it all. I hope so, anyway.
And this is just the personal thing. How heartbreaking is it? Like, I'm originally from the Bay Area, so to see the Sharks make it to the playoffs and then finally make it to the Cup, and after 25 plus years never having won it, and then watching the Golden Knights as an expansion team come out the gate and go, boom, we're going to take it. Like, how disheartening is that as a hockey player to watch?
It is, especially with the players that the Sharks have who have been loyal to that organization up until that point. It's like, oh man, these guys are so close. But I will tell you, having lost minor things, and I work with, some big time football programs. I've worked with Penn State, I work with Rutgers. Seeing the players go through it and get to that almost winning level, they have a much easier time than fans do. They have put it all on the line. They can say to themselves, I did my best. Whereas a fan, it's just, for that San Jose team, that was brutal. And watching these teams just have so much success. Hopefully the Kraken don't come in and fly by your Sharks this year.
You never know, man. Seattle might surprise everybody. But Mike Messner, thank you so much for your time. First, you're checking available now on demand. Where can we find it? Which platforms on demand? And then where can we find you and the film on social media if we want to connect?
Everything's on the website, firstyearchecking.com. My email's on there. If you feel like dropping a line, let me know how you like it and what we should do next time, what we should do differently.
Perfect. And just to make sure, is first spelled out, or is it one ST?
We have both. So we have one ST and first. We were thinking ahead there.
Perfect. Mike, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on everything. The documentary is absolutely phenomenal. I'm glad we could chat about this without giving too much away in the film, so people will actually go watch it.
Thank you for the time.